Hi, friends.
Hey.
I was so worried about going after the Onion guys because they're so funny and I'm not like really that funny. So like, just clap anyway for the answers. It'll be okay. How is everybody feeling? Thanks for being out here in the super heat. They did give you free food across the way though, I think, right? Yeah? Make sure you get that. That's good.
Yeah, we appreciate you all being here for 1A Day. A hot day, but a good day, right, guys? Good afternoon. My name is Letha Knott. I am a fellow for the First Amendment at the Freedom Forum. And, welcome to 1A Day, and thank you all so much for being here. Hope you're having a good day so far. So a recent Pew survey found that more and more Americans are getting their news from TikTok.
1 in 3.
1 in 3, which is crazy. It's actually the percentage of Americans who get their news from TikTok has tripled since 2020.
You're welcome.
And I mean, that's especially true for adults under the age of 30. 1 in 3 of them get their news from TikTok. So I'm just really happy that we can be joined today by a TikTok influencer who is serving as a trusted news source for a new generation of news consumers. Vitus Spehar is a seasoned TikToker and policy advocate who hosts the popular Under the Desk news series, which has 3 million loyal subscribers and is just a trusted source of news for millennials and Gen Zers. Vitus has been nominated for the 2023 GLAAD Media Award for Outstanding Podcast and won the Webby's special, the Special Achievement Award in 2023 for, I'm quoting this, their articulate and concise but unabridged reporting and for methodically balancing positive news with more solemn headlines. And before we begin, we can actually take a quick look at that work. There's a video that we can play.
Monday night, and here's what's happened.
B, what are you doing under my desk?
Well, under the desk is kind of my thing.
I'm on the floor because I'm a floor person. The floor understands. The floor is always there for me. The floor will never steer me wrong.
You're going to grow up, you're going to be loved, you're going to get to be exactly who you want to be. They overturned Roe v. Wade. So there's something the media never tells you when there's a mass shooting, but I'm going to tell you now in as gentle a way as possible. It's Friday night.
And we've got some good news.
Former President Trump has been indicted by the Manhattan Criminal Court. Drag is not your enemy. I'll see y'all tomorrow for more good news only.
Thank you so much for being with us.
It's an honor to be here. I'm so excited.
Now, okay, can we start like a superhero movie? Can we start with your origin story? How did Under the Desk News come to be?
So before I was under the desk, I was the director of impact for the James Beard Foundation, and I had spent the entirety of my career in food and beverage and hospitality. I was a very high-end political caterer, which if you're in DC, you know, are some of the most powerful people in this city because we're like in the butler's pantry while all the politicians are talking about what they really want to do. And so I spent 15 years listening to that, and I think it gave me a really good foundation for how politics work, who these folks are as people, and the way they speak changes from when they're in front of a podium to when they're in the butler's pantry with me. And I think that education was really what helped me when I decided to start Under the Desk News, which I started originally doing cooking videos because I was a chef before. So I would do like throwing butter in the pan and talking about how to apply for a PPP loan. And then when January 6th happened, I got under my desk to explain the 25th Amendment to Mike Pence. And I tried to do it in a cute and friendly way. And my friend Randy later that night was like, you better get back under the desk and tell him what's happening now. And it just became this safe space to deliver news, this idea of like being under our desk, it being a secret, it being a place where we could hide and talk about stuff. And at the same time, it was pandemic, deep pandemic times, and all the news anchors were home, if you remember. Like Savannah Guthrie, Rachel Maddow, everybody was home at their home desks, and I didn't want to present myself on TikTok as like a real journalist at that point. So I was like, well, if I'm under the desk, it'll be kitschy enough for people to know that it's just like me, your friend V, telling you what's happening.
And it's true, like Under the Desk News, it has such a conversational tone to it. Like it's your friend explaining it to you. And I think that's like such a great, unique thing about your channel. What else do you think makes it different than other sources of news?
I have been told that I have like oldest daughter, big sister, favorite cousin energy, which is like, you know, when you're like little and you're trying to learn about the world, and most of the adults are like, you don't need to know about that, but you have like that one cool cousin who will like let you in on the secret, which is like why mommy and daddy are fighting. I don't know, like something difficult. I try to keep that energy for folks because people got so afraid of the news. I mean, we went through this period of great political division where every single news story was just calling out the other side as the greatest evil that had ever existed. Everything was super intense. You remember at that time CNN was doing way too many breaking news breaks, which luckily they did ease off of later, but it just felt like a scary time. And so I wanted to take this understanding that I had of politics and of how to talk to people and how to explain things to people like they're smart, because they are. And folks really started to trust the news again. They would see me come up and they'd be like, okay, I'm gonna listen because I'm not gonna be upset when this is over, even if it's an upsetting story. And so that's like the goal of what I do. Trying to make people be conversational, feel safe, able to accept information without accepting a lot of like trauma and jaw clenching in addition.
And how does your process work? Like, how do you decide which stories that you're going to focus on?
So I am a super news junkie in the first place. So oftentimes if there's a story that everybody's got, I'll skip that one because I'll assume like we know that, right? We know like kind of that big headline that everybody's gonna run over and over and over. And I try to find things that are interesting to the average person, and then I try to find an angle that makes sense for today. So like there are incredible journalists who, let's take the war in Ukraine, for example, who are like on the front lines, who are gonna tell you about what's happening. They're gonna be able to show you what's happening. I don't have boots on the ground in Ukraine money. Like we need the big outlets to do that stuff. But what I can do is talk about the grandmas, right? I can talk about the grandmas who are making Molotov cocktails. I can talk about what it's like at the border and how Jose Andres is feeding people. I can fill in that people side of the story, which allows people to connect with the story, but not have to have such legacy knowledge of foreign policy and war to like understand. And I think it's really helped soften a lot of these stories for folks to make them make sense for them. So that's like kind of an example of the process. I also don't talk about Trump as much as possible because I feel like major news outlets have gotten into a circle where they're either saying what he did or they're in reaction to what he did, and everybody's gotten a lot better at that. But for a while I felt like we weren't learning. Like my best example of this is when Trump's plane was sitting on the tarmac because he was going to go get arrested the first time. The Tennessee 3 was happening at that time, and on TikTok we had Brother Jones and Sister Gloria and Brother Justin talking about what was happening in the State House in Tennessee, whereas a lot of folks couldn't pivot that quickly to what was happening for the people. And so sometimes that's how I pick a story too.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, there's no added value for covering a story that everyone else has covered to death.
And they cover it better, right? Like, some people have way more better resources than I do, or they're smarter than I am on something. And if I'm not an expert on it, what I want to do is identify for my audience who is an expert on that and be like, no, I trust them. You should check this out. And I do that a lot with the reporters of the newspapers I've worked with. Like, I was hyping Erin Logan from the LA Times forever because she was such a great political reporter and still is. And if I can introduce more of the TikTok audience to more of the traditional journalists, then we can sort of build back this trust in news and build back the idea of subscribing to quality journalism. And I think that's like a responsibility.
I love that because it's not about like one channel or platform replacing another. It's all sort of symbiotic, right?
I don't want that responsibility of being the only person you get the news from. Like, definitely get it from me, but if you're curious about something, I want to be able to point you to other people who can give you that kind of like rabbit hole deep dive, and they should get the credit for doing all that work. And so we try to be like really collaborative on Under the Desk.
And as a news junkie, what news sources do you rely on?
I really like the newspapers, and if that's, like I worked for LA Times, I'm working with Washington Post right now, and I like Axios. I think Axios lays things out really easy for people. Vox is incredible, The Guardian's great. Other TikTokers, local journalists, the community journalist or citizen journalist, first-person stories, because I think they're coming at it from an angle of like deeply caring about that community, and so they're going to talk more from the human space as opposed to the broader big picture politics space. those are the ones that I like the most.
And in terms of your audience, do you have a sense of like who watches your newscast?
Well, if you were to like look at me, right, and meet me, you would think that I probably like have a big female audience, a big gay audience maybe. I have a very big conservative audience, and the number one employer of my audience is the United States Army, which I don't think a lot of people would have guessed. And I think it really does come back to this fact that we are not as divided as we think we are. We are just radicalized against each other depending on what news channel our parents kept on oftentimes. And so in social media, because we're not attacking one side or the other and we're talking about a specific issue and how it affects people directly, conservatives don't see my news as divisive to them. They see it as like, I get called non-biased a lot, which I think is funny because like I am extremely biased. Like everybody is extremely biased to like who they are and what they believe in. But I can kind of like hold that, I guess, hold some space for that without presenting it forward. And a lot of folks have told me that they've learned more from like watching my channel, or I'll get DMs from some really interesting groups that you wouldn't think would be watching Under the Desk or DMing me and asking me to fact check something that they've seen in their corner of the internet. And I'm like, Jeremy, you know that that's not what it is. You're so much smarter than that. Let's be smart together about it. And I think that trust I give them, they give me. And if you look at my comment section even, it's a safe space, and I monitor that obsessively because I don't want to lose the space we created where people can ask a question without getting, killed in the comments. But yeah, so I have a pretty broad audience. I think people are interested in politics right now, and they want to be smart, and they're like sort of distrustful of the government, and so the more information they can get, the more they can like feel confident.
I like that. People want to be smart.
They do.
They want to know things.
And they are smart. So often we think somebody is like dumb or they don't get it because they don't share our point of view, but oftentimes like whatever's been triggered in them to have that point of view, we have to get to like, what is it about you that wants to protect children? What a wonderful thing that you want to do. You want to protect children. Tell me what that means to you. And they're like, it means no drag queens. And I'm like, does it though? Or what does it mean to you? What are you afraid of? What are you afraid of losing? And if you could get people talking, you can also oftentimes get them agreeing a little bit more and softening a little bit more.
And do you think that the platform that you use, TikTok, does that impact like your relationship with your audience and even the content that you produce? Like, do you think that it's, say, different to provide news on TikTok as opposed to news on Facebook or like on a cable news channel or anything else like that?
Yes, I think they're all important. TikTok democratizes who gets audience better than any other social media platform because we know that the meta platforms really did give a lot of like extra love to people who were already public figures or established channels or that could pay to advertise to have their content boosted. TikTok for the last 3 years didn't have any of those options. So it was really merit-based. Can you connect with an audience and are you believable? And I like that about TikTok. I also think compared to the connection I have with, say, my YouTube audience or even my podcast audience, I can talk to people directly like this. You can respond to comments so quickly. You can find those threads. Your DMs are just laid out in a way that's really easy to understand and have a back and forth conversation. I love that block button, and I love the keyword filter button, which isn't like necessarily super free speech, but it is for me to be able to put words in there that I never want to see come up in my comments, like real hate words. Because again, we're just creating this space that's like happy and healthy for everyone. And I think TikTok allows you the most authentic connections with your followers for sure.
And creating a space that makes it possible for you to do your work.
Yeah,
basically.
without seeing a bunch of like scary hate comments in there and then people reacting to Harry's scary hate.
And okay, now the big picture questions.
Yes.
About the news media. What do you see as the future of how people consume news, how they report news? I mean, we're always talking about like evolving media. What do you think? Where do you think we're going?
So my most recent favorite day of news when it comes to, let's say, like cable news, was Tucker Carlson got fired from Fox News and he was no longer on the air. And about 3 days later, Rachel Maddow had a new episode. And it was the first time that I watched her show and she wasn't in reaction to Tucker Carlson. And she talked about incredible, awesome stuff in her podcast. And she was just like, she was like more alive to me. And I think that's where we're going. I think reactionary news media, people have exhausted themselves on, and we're more into things like a podcast, right? We see those be so popular, or a TikTok channel that's niched. We want to do a deep dive on something we're really genuinely interested in without being told if that thing is good or bad or going to ruin the world. I think we're going to see more local media, where there's a big push right now, and a bunch of philanthropies just this week committed like $500 million to this initiative called Press Forward, which is the attempt to bring back your local community news, because I think that's so important. We got so big and global on like huge issues in politics. And folks want to know like what's happening in their little town. It's so hard to like take on all the weight of the world. Sometimes you just want to know what's happening in Rochester, and can I do anything to be useful, or what's happening in the queer community, and can I do anything to be useful. So I do think that we're going to see less effect on like global policy and like international stuff, and a little bit more on like niche local, giving a voice to people who aren't part of a big network, because that's who has the trust right now.
And that's where so many changes that affect people's lives happen on the local level. That makes sense.
And we see like the big news folks all have TikToks now, right? Like Jake Tapper's killing it on TikTok. He was like one of the original ones to have a TikTok. And I think that that's important. It's like, if you remember the early days of Twitter, the big excitement was that you could connect with people you admired, if those people were celebrities or news accounts. And you have that opportunity, like, again, on TikTok to directly connect with people you really care about. Like Stephanie Ruhle is on there. She's got a great TikTok. Some of the politicians are on there. AOC has one. Jamal Bowman has one. Of course, all the Gen Z politicians have them. And it just allows them to sort of shake off the airs of what we expect when we see finished product television. And I think it's helping. I do think it's helping.
And you know, one thing about TikTok is that these are short form videos. You generally condense a lot of news into like a 60-second video, which is super impressive. Do you think there's still an appetite for long form journalism?
Yes. So I was actually kind of afraid that there wasn't, because it was like, people are just used to me physically under the desk. They don't know I have legs, and like I do tell them everything they need to know in 60 seconds. I've started doing 10-minute videos now, and they do just as well, if not better. I think that folks are attached to the storyteller more than how much time they're willing to give you. I think if you're a good storyteller and you're engaging and you respect them and they enjoy the time they spend with you, they'll spend a longer amount of time with you. But if you're sort of like adding a bunch of time to your TikToks just to get longer watch time, no, that's not going to happen. But I think if you've really got something to say, we will see longer form TikToks do really, really well, the way we do with YouTube shows and podcasts. Joe Rogan's podcast is outrageously popular, and it's not necessarily because it gives the best information. It's because he's really good at keeping you company. And so I think if you're really good at keeping your audience company, at bringing them into your point of view, at helping them feel something, whichever way that way is, I think you'll have more success than being the smartest, if that makes sense. I think that academicification, is that a word, of the news left a lot of people out.
And it's interesting because one of the things I heard you say in a previous interview is that you don't want to necessarily be perceived as the authority or the expert on something that might be dangerous. So what do you think that the role of a journalist should be?
I'm like, that's why I end a lot of my stuff. I'm like, if I give an opinion, I'm like, okay, but that's wild, right? Like, what do you think about that? Because you want people to not take what I say and then make that like a law. I don't want to be a religious leader, a cult leader. I don't want to be your only news network. I don't want to be your only anything. Like, that's too much pressure for me and for anyone to ever fully live up to, right? That's how we get into burnout. That's what I think is like an entrepreneur side of this. And I want people to think for themselves, because it's so fun to think for yourself. It's so fun to hear something that I said, right? Or my mom will call me up and be like, I just heard this thing you said, and me and Daddy were talking, and this is what Daddy says about it. And I'm like, I love that, Dad. Tell your golf buddies about that. Yes, you're recognizing signs of fascism, Pop. I'm so proud of you, right? And he like goes and golfs and talks about it. But he gets to have that feeling of bringing news to people that's interesting, that makes him an interesting conversationalist. My goal is to inform, to keep you company, but it's really to help you build confidence as a storyteller. I think one of the most abusive things that happens to people, and it happens often, whether it's a partner or a teacher or the media, is we tell people they're not good at telling stories. They're not smart enough. They don't get it. You're going to be embarrassed if you say that. And you're not. You're not. You are smart enough. The way you thought of it is unique and interesting and worth hearing. And so I just want to like keep giving people the confidence. I got under my desk and 3 million people were like, I trust that person. You know what I mean? That person is spitting facts, right? Like, I'm silly. People will believe your side of the story too, and I want more people to get that feeling that I get when I get a like on a TikTok. You know?
Oh, yeah. No, speaking of getting under your desk, how did you get Barack Obama to get under the desk with you?
Let me tell you about this. So we were doing this like initiative, and he was going to help Gen Z for Change do a thing about just getting registered to vote. And I got this call that President Obama would like to do the TikTok with you, and I was like, is it okay that I voted for John McCain? I was young. I voted for who my dad voted for. And they were like, well, you don't have to tell him that. I was like, I feel like I do.
You gotta be honest,
I've
right?
got to be honest, right? I didn't want to lie to him, right? And he's my favorite president, and I love him, and we had pictures of him and Michelle at my wedding, and like, I love him. And they were like, no, that's okay, because it's just about voting. And then they told me that he would not get under the desk because it's unbecoming of a president to sit on the floor. And I was like, that makes sense to me. Like, sure. And so I was under his desk, and I was waiting, and they're like, you only really get one shot at it, too. So, like, your script is approved. Here's what you're going to do. He's going to sit down. He's going to say this. You're going to say the John McCain thing. He's going to laugh, and you're going to walk out. And then I wasn't totally ready, so when you watch that video, and I'm like, because that was my real reaction, because he just opened the door and was like, V, what are you doing under my desk? And I was like, oh my God. But I had to like keep going. That undergraduate degree in theater kicked in, and I was like, remember your lines, you trained for this. And then he sat on the ground, and I was like, they told me you weren't going to sit on the ground. He's like, well, you were on the ground. Of course I was going to sit on the ground. He's like, I had kids. I sit on the ground. I'm not that old. And I was like, oh my God, he was amazing. He was the best. It was the best. So that's how that came about.
Oh, that's so awesome.
Yep.
Okay, your other dream guests in a dream world, who are the top 3 people you'd have under the desk with you?
Okay, so, I mean, like Dolly Parton, obviously. Such a champion for freedom. I really like WWE, which is like kind of a beige flag, I suppose. But I think Becky Lynch is a wrestler who did this incredible thing where she branded herself as the man. And so you go to these WWE, like typically masculine events, and there's like all these dudes in the women's t-shirts because they say the man on them, and I love that. And so I'd love to know how she like thought of that and did that. And I don't know, like, we have a local radio DJ in my town. His name is Pat Duffy, and I'm like obsessed with him. I think he's like the best. He's really good storyteller and interesting at the news, and I've always thought like your local break room news radio guy is cool, so I would love to interview Duffy. I'm like into regular people. I don't know.
I love that. That's local people
Yeah,
and national
like
celebrities and everybody, yeah.
For 20 years, this guy gets up at 3 a.m. and puts together interesting local stories and like does comedy. Like, that's fascinating. I want to know what his life is like.
Is there anything, so, okay, let me see if I've got this. You've got Under the Desk News.
Yep.
You also have a podcast.
Yes.
You have a YouTube channel.
Yep.
What's
You
your
gotta do it all.
Anything else on the horizon?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I do speaking stuff. I volunteer. My favorite of all the things is the TikTok, hands down. YouTube scares me. There's a lot of, the comments on YouTube are tough. If you're gonna start a content journey, don't begin on YouTube. It's the hardest to grow on, and the comments are the most brutal. But I love TikTok. I really have met a lot of friends on that. I think it's a great platform to engage with people. I think it's really still very democratized for how you go viral or how you build an audience. And I think it rewards positivity much more than the other platforms do, although we are seeing that change, right? There's a lot of folks I notice now who do good news segments like I do, and I love that. And we've seen Facebook kind of say that they're not going to amplify angry reactions the way they used to. And TikTok has always been, at least for me and for a lot of people, a positive place. So that's my favorite one.
And how do you do that? I mean, I know you have Positive News Thursdays,
Yep.
right? How do you balance like the positive stories with what makes up the bulk of news?
I again, that degree in theater I think makes a big difference because I know how to build a presentation, right? So in theater, they teach you there has to be rise and relief. So even in my show that I do every night, I create moments of rise and relief. If I have something really terrible to say, I'll try to follow that with something that's like somber but not going to make you just want to cry. And then maybe something super goofy, like about how they're aging wine at the bottom of the ocean. That's fascinating. We could talk about that. I have stuff built into every show. Thursdays is good news only because people I found needed a break from the news by Thursday, and sometimes I don't even do a report on Friday, and nobody has noticed yet. So sometimes I do my own some of Fridays. But within the structure of what I'm doing, it's not like happy, sad, but it's a balance of, did I give you something to change a subject with if you need to? Like, hey, do you know about they age wine at the bottom of the ocean if your uncle brings up like the indictments and you don't want to talk about it, right? But I give you enough information about the other stories that you're conversational so you feel smart, so nobody can catch you off guard. And that's the goal of every show I do, isn't necessarily to like get the most craziest story, but to give you stuff to think about that hopefully helps.
That wine at the bottom of the ocean thing is an excellent cocktail party opener.
Yeah, it's just
I
like
that.
a fun one, you know? Or I do a lot of science news now because I think we have to show people that the world is okay and it's not all bad. Like, if it bleeds, it leads, or whatever. We're over that. We don't want to hear that anymore. We know that there are monsters, but we need to know that like octopuses have DNA that we can study to like create new medicines. Like, that's really cool. Or like, I don't know. I try to, why is the weather the way it is? Not just climate policy, but like, hey, do you know 900,000 years ago, we almost did have a climate apocalypse, but we didn't. Let's learn from that, right? Like, there's cool stuff that you can say about what's going on without politicizing it all.
Right, and I think people sometimes lose sight of that the news encompasses a lot of different
Yeah.
topics and not necessarily national hot-button political issues. I mean, that too, of course.
There's so many the news is like cool stuff, right? That's what we should talk about, like what's cool, what's newsworthy, what's interesting. And some of it is, let's just take a break and do good news only so that we can feel really happy and smart and like we could go on. And sometimes it is really difficult. And like when I covered the pullout of Afghanistan or the beginning of the Ukraine war, even the indictments, like there's a somberness to it that doesn't have to be scary. It's just like, we're pulling out of Afghanistan and it's going. And what I found when I did the Afghanistan coverage is people wanted to know what was happening day to day. The foreign correspondents were best for that because they had the video. You need to see that kind of thing with your eyes. The lens I covered it from was from my veterans because I knew I had such a big military audience and my DMs were full of guys, mostly guys, saying, I feel like I failed. And I started to see a lot of like very hopeless thinking from the way the news was covering it and saying stuff like, what we did over there didn't matter and it was such a joke and they tricked you. Well, that was being received by veterans as like, what you did sucked, you're bad, everything that you did wasn't worth anything, and like your whole life's purpose that you like hung your hat on was a joke. And so I started covering the veteran suicide hotline instead, and they saw a 263% increase in calls, not just because of me, but because that news story really, really hit people in a deep, dark, big, sad place. And so I think as a reporter, at least for me, it was like looking at who's my community, who's my audience, what do they need to know? And my audience needed to know the veteran suicide hotline. They didn't need to know how many helicopters were left, Right. So I think I have a luxury of really knowing my audience better than some of the TV networks do, but it takes all of us to take care of folks and make sure that they have the information they need.
That's true. As you said, there's networks that have people on the ground, and
Yeah.
you're providing a different perspective they might not be getting there.
Mm-hmm.
So since it is 1A Fest,
Yes.
what would you say, what do you value most about the First Amendment, and how does it guide what you do?
So what I value most about the First Amendment is not just what it gives you, but what you don't have to do, right? Like when we think of success, we think of what we get to do someday. We get to fly on a private plane or like order off a menu without ever looking at the prices. And the First Amendment gives you that. It gives you the right to say and be whatever you want to be and worship who you want. You get stuff from it, but you also get protections, or you're supposed to get protections from it. So with success and with free speech should come freedom of certain things. You should be free of religion being forced on you. You should be free of hate speech being forced on you. And so what I value most and seek to protect about the First Amendment is that, not just what we get, but what we get protected from, and where those lines are, so that we can build a conversation that's based on respect. We're coming from the same points, and we all make that social contract to agree that freedom isn't just what you get, it's what you don't have to do too.
The freedom to speak, the freedom not to speak.
To not speak, yeah. All that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Everybody, please, thank you so much for being here and sharing your thoughts.
I'm so glad to be here. I love DC, and I'm so glad for all of you coming out. It was so hot. I appreciate you so much. Let's go back in the air conditioning and under the desk, though, huh?
We're all sweating here together. We just really appreciate you guys being here.